So Pia Waugh from Austrac, where we've got Daniel from Thomson Reuters coming to speak to us about blockchain and what it is. But we thought we'd also start with just a 10-minute introduction about hackathons and what a hackathon is, as a precursor to teach everyone and share with everyone a methodology which has proven quite useful for governments across the world. So hackathon is really just a safe space for people from different backgrounds, different skills, different experiences or disciplines come together in explore ways and new things. So what you tend to have is you see it as a methodology and creation of new things. It can be to develop new policy, new products, new services, or new technologies. It's important to note up front that a hackathon, the word hack in context, is not about cracking. It's not about broke systems. It's not about something illegal. It's actually a definition of the word hacker. The word is more of a tech problem around that with the link, but it's definitely not about breaking into things. So a new piece of software, different, creating something to solve a problem. A quick outline on how one works, and we'll just do this for just a few minutes for those across the ICE Forum membership who have done hackathons before. A outline of how one works. You take a combination of different sorts of people. You can have a private hackathon where you invite just people in your own organisation or your trusted member group, or maybe from a couple of trusted partners, or you might few select people that you actively invite, but you're actually making it open to the public. Generally speaking, there is a place for closed hacks. What you do is try the best mix of different skills in the room. For some problem spaces, private hackathons are quite useful. Corporate hackathons are useful, but I want to get a real display of the broadest possible skills and ideas. Open hackathons are best if you can do them and if you're comfortable to do them. What you tend to do is you invite people to come along to a 1 or 2 day event. A lot of hackathons tend to do sort of 40-hour challenges. People arrive in the room not knowing what they're going to work on in advance. That's kind of important, because if they know in advance, then some people tempted to work on something in advance, and that gives them an unfair advantage. So you arrive in the room, you welcome them, you introduce the challenges that you want them to work on. And challenges might include things like, trying to solve a particular problem in a novel way, or trying to explore what can be done with a new technology, or trying to use a data set or an API in a novel and interesting way. So one of the big examples we have in Australia is called Hack. It's our national event with Australia and New Zealand participating, with around 3,000 participants annual event. And no one knows what the competition goals will be on the day, but it tends to have themes. So in the hackathon that we're doing for ICE, it's going to be based around blockchain as an emerging technology, but also based around some novel challenges around how it could be used to disrupt the financial sector, or how it could be used maybe to do bad things. We'll have those challenges collectively, but you don't want to set a challenge like build application to do something specific, because that's what we use labor for, or procurement or development. This is more exploring new novel ways of doing things and seeing it like a smelting pot, like a bit of innovation opportunity is the right way to think of a hackathon. So you give them their challenges, they then will sort of talk to each other and form teams quite naturally. People will quite often reach out to create a team with maybe some developers, maybe a service design person, or a user experience person, or a story person, or a business analyst, or a data specialist. You tend to have teams forming on the basis of the different skills and the different interests that they might share, and then they will work on the problem over a day or two, and they will develop a solution to that problem. It may be a pretend website, or it might be a piece of data visualization or analysis, or all different things. And what they'll usually do is they'll present the outcome of their hack. In some smaller hackathons, you tend to have people get up and give a presentation at the end, which then gets judged. In a large hackathon like GovHack, we actually ask people to record a screen, sort of a presentation, like a small video presentation of what they've built, because it not only does scale when you have 400 or 500 outcomes from one event. You can't listen to all in one go. But if you've got a video, then that means that the idea and the innovation is preserved and available to everyone forevermore. So it's a wonderful way of sharing that intelligence across a broader community. And then to have some sort of award ceremony, which may be on the night, or might be a few days later, or indeed might be a few weeks later, depending on the competition. Enough. People make the outcomes from a hackathon, and they will use them to build a business or to build a new product, or sometimes a government or a company organization will pick up some of the hacks and continue developing them or integrate them into what they're doing, and there's many examples of that. In some cases, the hacks themselves spur another event. And quite often in hackathons today, organizations will have a special prize to actually support a team to go on to develop a particular outcome for additional weeks or months to see we can go from there. So there's a lot of different models. The big question for a lot of people when they're first introduced to this space is why anyone participated in a hackathon. The same reason that you might, go fishing on the weekend or go swimming or go bungee jumping, whatever it is that you find fun. There is a community, and I am one of them, that actually finds playing with technology fun. For a lot of people, participating in a hackathon is a way to develop their skills, to meet new friends, to show off, and to creatively stretch wings in a way that they can't necessarily do in work or just at home. So this creates a great opportunity to get together with other geeks, with other hackers, with other like-minded people trying to create a better world, and actually show what you can do and contribute to making a better world. So most people say that the first reason they come is to have fun and skills, but some people are also motivated by the prizes. But that also leads to the idea that prize money is not really the reason people get involved. It's just a nice to have at the end of the day. But getting into that natural motivation that people have to creatively solve problems is what makes hackathons work and continue to work over time. So there's a Hackathon 101. I'll just give you some more information about that. I'm going to hand over now to Scott to talk to us about a bit of a blockchain 101 to get us on the same page. Thank you very much, Scott. Mute. On mute, sorry.
Pat.
We can hear you now.
There we go. We got it all sorted. So my name's Scott Manuel. I'm with Thomson Reuters, and am super excited to talk to you guys today about an emerging technology called blockchain. Just a little bit of intro for myself, about myself. I run a group called the Product Management Organization within Applied Innovation. So my group does is it looks out at technologies that are 3 to 5 years away from mass commercialization. And it explores those technologies to see how they could potentially impact our Thomson Reuters products, or the business, or how they could be business disruptors to those of our customers, and find ways in which we can potentially productize them, integrate them into the services that we offer, or work with them and exploit them in some way for Thomson Reuters or on behalf of our customers. So I think I have one of the best jobs in the world. I'm talking to you guys today from Durham, North Carolina, in the U.S. And one of the topics that we have been focusing on for about 2 years now is this whole notion of blockchain. I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to turn my video off because I find that in long conferences it does better to conserve the bandwidth. And I also want to ask you guys that if you have questions, let's iterate on them while I go. I will just break in, and if something's not clear, let's talk about it. Or if you've got a question or some way we can amplify it, it will also help everyone who's going to be watching this on the recording. So this cover from The Economist is from late last year. I like to think whenever you make it on the cover of The Economist, you're heavily in a hype cycle. It's either a world leader in trouble, or whether the cover of The Economist or the front page of a newspaper or an entertainment magazine, there's something has happened that's really brought you to the forefront of thought. And I never would have really thought that Bitcoin and blockchain would have made it to the cover like this, and would have created so much excitement in the financial services space, the many of the spaces that our customers are in, including financial services, tax and accounting, the legal space, the technology space in general, as well as is sort of capturing the spirits and minds of governments, nonprofits, emerging economies that are really trying to figure out, what does this Bitcoin thing and blockchain thing mean? So what I'm going to try to do is talk about Bitcoin first and separate that from what we're going to really be focusing on, which is blockchain, which is underlying technology for Bitcoin. But before you get to blockchain, you really got to understand how we got here. And so let's step back in time a little bit. Bitcoin and blockchain are relatively new implementations to ideas and experimentation that has been going on for years and decades. As Mark Andreessen says here, there's 20 years of cryptographic research, or 30 years of research in cryptography and 20 years in cryptographic currency sort of came together and created this thing called Bitcoin, which has garnered a lot of interest, a lot of attention, and a lot of notional value in the world. So where did Bitcoin come from? Its origins are not that far away. In 2008, a guy by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto published a very academic paper, a very short paper from academic standards, about 6-7 pages, called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And you can easily get this down at the bottom here, the slides of the source. You can easily get this paper, and it's worth a read. There's some math in it, but it's pretty easy to go through the concepts that Satoshi Nakamoto explained. So right after writing that paper, just a few months later, he released the first instance of the software, the core Bitcoin software, launched a network, seeing the first units of currency called Bitcoin. A year later, Satoshi Nakamoto walked away from this thing. The source code was out there for the open community to use, to play with, to maintain, to build on, to manage. The seeds of this first currency had just started. Satoshi Nakamoto walked away. And one of the more intriguing parts of this story is that we don't actually know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. In the bottom right-hand corner, there's a Where's Waldo picture. And this search for this individual, there's a lot of hints. There's been people who have said they were Satoshi Nakamoto, but of dubious background, and it's unclear if they really are. But this person that sort of jumped on the scene created a currency that's essentially worth about in today's dollars, around $10 billion, any U.S. dollars, and he essentially disappears. It's slow going in the beginning, right? And you'll look at the chart on the right-hand side of this slide here, and you'll see that the value, and again, this is in U.S. dollars, of Bitcoin was essentially zero at the start. But the 2013-14 time frame, and then now, as we look into the later parts of 2016, there's been a ton of value placed in Bitcoin, and to today's about $10 billion. If you see that spike that was in the 2013 time frame, That notional value came a lot from the Chinese getting heavily engaged in this currency and starting to buy up a lot of Bitcoin. And this currency floats just like other currencies do. It's completely a supply and demand equation of the value of this currency. But it's different, right? This currency is ultimately very different than whether the Australian dollar or the euro or the US dollar. It's deflationary by design. So say that there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoins. All they're going to be mined. Currently, there's about 75% of the Bitcoins that will be, quote, mined, and that mining terminology will mean something in a minute. About 75% of them have been mined thus far. So only 20 million, there's, 16 million out there that are being traded and leveraged. It's pseudonymous, so it's not anonymous, right? You can determine who the owner, in many cases, you can determine who the owner is of various Bitcoins and what they're doing with those transactions. It's pseudo-anonymous. It's harder at times to find out who the actual individual is, but it's well documented and well understood how you create tools in which to find out who the owner of those of Bitcoins are. You'll see volatility, right? Volatility in this currency is very high. It's not like volatility that we see in the U.S. market or any developed nation's currency. You can see that it's less volatile than some currencies in the developing world, and that is one of the chief reasons why this currency has been adopted in some of those places. It's not controlled by a government. It's not controlled. It can't immediately be devalued by a government that having issues with its governance. It's relatively stable to some of those and has handled some shocks pretty well too. One of the challenges though with Bitcoin is it's kind of difficult to spend. In the developed world don't really have an issue. If we want to spend money, you can get out a credit card or a debit card or some other form or cash, some other form of remit and just use it. But Bitcoin is a little bit more of a challenge to spend. And there's been all sorts of just questionable and shady people involved in Bitcoin. You guys may, if you've ever read about this, some of the stuff that makes it into the news are the things like Mt. Gox, where 650,000 Bitcoin went missing February 14th. They disappeared, right? And that's one of the challenges behind a currency like this, a digital currency. There isn't paper to move around. There aren't, bonds that have been written against it. It is a purely exists in a digital form. It's not backed by a gold or some other commodity. It just only exists in a digital format. So when it gets lost, it's gone. So Mt. Gox had a hack, and 650,000 Bitcoins went missing in 14. We've also seen nefarious uses of Bitcoin. The Silk Road was an example of where it was leveraged there for a lot of illicit transactions. It's still in the dark web is a currency du jour for all of the nefarious activity that's happening there. So even with that backdrop of a currency that again under all sort of odd situations with a guy, we assume it was a guy, it could have been a woman, Satoshi Nakamoto, creating the software that generated this thing. Over time, it's created $10 billion of US dollar notional value. Something here. And what's here is this underlying technology that Bitcoin is built on, and it's called blockchain. And in minutes here, walking through what a blockchain is and how it works, and some examples of what transaction looks like on a blockchain. And we're going to use Bitcoin as the example, but we're going to be able to step away in a bit and talk about how these examples fit into the real world and how people are trying to do things with blockchain. So what is a blockchain? I don't have to read the slides, but it is a distributed ledger, and what that means, what distributed means here, distributed is the important word, is that it's decentralized. The copy of the ledger is everywhere, not in one central place. If we think about a bank account right now, so I have a bank account with the U.S. Bank, they have a ledger, right? It's their ledger of my assets and every one of their customers. Centralized. It's kept in one place. And I mean, there are obviously in the computer science world, there are obviously copies and backups and, you know, other ways of storing that, but there's really only one live copy of that database. Well, in the blockchain world, that database doesn't exist. There's infinite copies of that database that are shared all around the network. So that creates opportunity, right? That creates the ability to have shared knowledge to everyone. You don't have to trust one single entity with the knowledge. You also, from a security perspective, there's advantages too by having completely decentralized or distributed ledgers. A couple of other key benefits of blockchain are that it's not only used for a currency or for something of value. You store anything on it. Again, it's digitized. It's a digitized ledger. So you can put anything that can be described by can actually be stored on a blockchain. It can be digitized and be readable, which makes it extremely flexible, right? And we're going to talk about some of those use cases that are coming up. And something else that's really important here is that it's instantaneous in the knowledge about what's in that ledger. Since something is written to a blockchain, it's to all of the copies of the distributed ledger, all of the copies, or all the nodes, and that would be the other name for the copies of that ledger out there, have agreed consensus on the record that is in that blockchain, and instantaneously have a copy of it. And then back to probably the most important part is that there's no single party that owns it or tamper with it or that can muck with it or create new transactions or fake assets. You try, and over the period of time that Bitcoin has existed, Bitcoin is the longest running use case for blockchain. It has been attacked numerous times. It has been spoofed. It has been every sort of, the way we think about it in the cyber world, every sort of attack possible that has been tried on Bitcoin, and they've largely been unsuccessful. So we do know that it has a very high capability for tamper resistance, immutability, not being able to muck with it after it's been put on the network, and decentralization. And then when bringing down a node or two actually doesn't hurt the network as a whole. So let me pause there and see if there's any initial questions.
So Pia? When we go to questions, I might go around the world a little bit rather than just opening. Otherwise, everyone will talk at the same time. So, remember, we have no questions from Sydney. Do we have any questions?
I just want to know, so if you can have multiple copies of this blockchain, is the way to know what the correct copy is the one that has the most, like the one has the, like, so you've got 100 copies of it and 2 of them are different and 98 are the same. Is that the way you know which is the correct version?
So that is one of the ways, right? Because you are creating something that, so the blockchain, and I'm going to give a great example of this, but the blockchain is built up of cryptographically secured blocks. It's really just a chain of blocks. So let's table the question for just a second, because we will get into how do you know you have the most recent version of the blockchain, but you're on to the right idea. That's exactly the right idea.
Questions from Sydney? Okay. Cool. Good.
All right.
Thank you.
So how does this work? how do we put something on a blockchain, and what does it look like when a sender and a receiver are transacting? But remember, it's a ledger, so you're doing transactions. You're writing down transactions. And I'm going to walk you through this little example here, and we're going to use Bitcoin as the example because it's just the easiest. We all know and understand how money moves from one person to another, and so it's helpful in getting the basics down. In 3 parties involved here. There's me, the sender. There's who I'm sending it to, the receiver. I'll send some money to Pia today. And there's this decentralized blockchain network in the middle. And it is going to be running the software, the code that makes sure that everything is validated and appropriately transferred. So I decide that I'm going to move, 5 Bitcoins to Pia. At the onset, everything about this is based on cryptography. And in fact, it's public-private key cryptography, which has been around for 40 years, which is a well-understood type of cryptographic method. And therefore, I hold a private key. And to sign my transaction, the fact that I want to send 5 Bitcoins, I'm signing that transaction with my private key. And that says that I am who I am, and then I'm ready to make this transaction. The network is then be able to show that Scott's sending 5 Bitcoins to Pia. And he's signed the transaction. It is truly his private key. He has the capability to do that. And the network also knows, because it has a copy of the entire ledger. I truly do have 5 Bitcoins to send. I truly own these. So it does a simple check, and it looks and says, hey, he has 5 Bitcoins. This is for private key. This transaction is signed by his private key, so therefore it must be him. And I've now taken it and believe that all of those facts are accurate. I'm going to now move. The network is going to now move those 5 Bitcoins to Pia, and they go up in her address within the ledger. Looks like when we describe it, but this is digital. So everything is really, it's bits and bytes. So I have an address. I'm the sender. You'll see it down here, and this is all in base 58 notation, which is a type of notation that makes it easy for humans to look at these transactions. And that's the notation that's used within the blockchain world, or at least within the Bitcoin world of blockchain. I'm an address, a unique address for me, and Pia has a unique address for her, and then transaction also has an address. What an actual transaction looks like on the network. I believe got my cursor here. You can see everything is notated with these massively long 58 notations that are unique addresses. This one is my unique address right here. This is the actual amount of Bitcoin that I'm moving to Pia. And the way we do that in the Bitcoin space is that I actually move all the Bitcoin that I have, and I receive change back that I'm not sending to Pia. So it's number intensive. You note that this address right here doesn't have my name associated with it at all. It's not there. It's pseudo anonymous, and that I created this address, I created this account, and in my case, to buy Bitcoin, I did use my true name, and I linked it to an email address, and it is identifiable just because of the laws in the U.S. to transfer U.S. dollars into Bitcoin that you need to register. But anyone can set up these addresses without going through that KYC that my financial institution would have done to do that. You can go to ATMs. You can mine Bitcoin. There's a million ways you can get given Bitcoin, gift Bitcoin, and you can create these addresses anonymously. Also, these addresses aren't static. I have as many addresses as I want, and I can create new addresses, and I can move money around from address to address at will. But as I said before, these are pseudo-anonymous. You can find out who this is, right? All sorts of techniques in which we can do modeling and graphing around Bitcoin addresses to know who they are. But this is what one looks like. Now, look like from the network's perspective. What are these blocks I keep talking about? The way it works is the network saw my transaction, right? It saw the fact that I had privately signed a desire to shift 5 Bitcoins from me to Pia. What the network does is every 10 minutes, all new transactions that need validated, including 5 Bitcoins to Pia, are bundled. Right? These transactions are bundled up. They're all open and out there on the network. Anyone can see them, and they're bundled. And this notion of miners are the way in which we validate a transaction. Miners are the actors that host the nodes on the network. There's tens of thousands of miners out there. We're going to talk a little bit about what they really are, but there's tens of thousands of them out there that are running nodes, which is they're running computers that are going out, sucking up the transactions that have all happened in 10 minutes. And this is where Bitcoin's really unique. They're willing to solve an SHA-256-based puzzle, validates the transaction. It's a really hard cryptographic puzzle that requires a lot of computer power and a lot of, slow machine, a lot of time, right? But on a supercomputer, not much time. And what's really neat about this network is the strength of that puzzle actually changes as the processing power of the network change. This is how we ensure the transactions are validated, that they're cryptographically secured, and that they're handled appropriately is by creating this really hard math problem that takes all those transactions, places them into the network. Miners are incentivized to do that and use that computer power. In just a second, we'll get into their incentives. But just think of my original transaction of 5 Bitcoins to Pia. It gets up in a 10-minute sweep, and that puzzle is solved. So that transaction, along with all of the other ones that happened within that 10-minute span, are linked together, cryptographically signed, and that block is added to the chain, right? And 10 minutes, another group of transactions, no matter how many there are all put together. A cryptographic puzzle is solved, cryptographically signed, and added to the blockchain. So these actions just build on each other, one after another, or these blocks of transactions build on each other, one after another, and get to this notion of a blockchain. Now, this is what a block looks like. This, in fact, is the actual block 369576 of my transaction from my account to Pia's account, moving 5 blockchains. This is the last block, so that's how you know. The way that you know that you have the most recent block is that you can go back all the way through the chain in pattern. You can't have block 369576 without having block 369575, and the one previous to that, and the one previous to that. So every 10 minutes, these new blocks are being added to the chain in this way. Very secure way of doing it. Like computer science in the background, and a unique way of moving value from one individual to another individual without actually having a central party in the middle. Again, understanding of what's going on here.
I'm here in Canberra. It's all making sense to us. How are we going in Sydney? Oh, sorry. No, good. Melbourne? Sorry, Melbourne. Wollongong?
Good, thank you.
Cool. And on the phones, Grace?
I have a question, Scott. I suppose, just for my understanding, you're saying these miners, they play almost like an agent role. They're part of the blockchain. They're part of the problem-solving activity involved in creating the blockchain. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, Grace, you set me up perfectly for our talk a little bit about the miners.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Well, keep going with your question. Yep.
But it'll make more sense, Grace, also when you see the slides. So I'll distribute it very soon after this.
Thank you.
So we talked about these miners, right? So why are these actors in this? Like, why would you set up a computer, create a node, your power, your electricity, and resources to validate all of these transactions by people on a network? Well, they bought into the value of the currency. But that race to solve that hard cryptographic problem with all those transactions wrapped up in it, they get paid a certain amount of Bitcoin if solve the challenge, if they are able to solve that block. And in 10 minutes, only one miner wins the prize. And currently, the prize is 12 Bitcoin. So Bitcoin to U.S. dollars right now is about $750 to U.S. dollars to one Bitcoin. So you see, you're talking, like around $9,000, I guess, if my math is right, U.S. dollars for solving that prize. And in 10 minutes, there's a prize, right? So, and I also mentioned that the network, the cryptographic problem gets more difficult. Gets more difficult as the computing power of the network increases. When Bitcoin originally started and the blockchain was first released, you could really solve one of these problems with a computer, with your mobile phone. I mean, in 2008, right? With a computer underneath your desk, your laptop, anything. But over time, as more and more nodes to join the network, opportunity to receive Bitcoin from the mining process, they're harder and harder. And when at first they would say, okay, well, it's not, let's put a bunch of desktop computers together to do it. Well, that's a good idea. But what if we were to use chips that are really good at solving math problems, which are GPUs, the graphic cards that live in our computers? What if we were to create custom machines that were just lined with graphics cards to solve this problem? Could I solve it quicker and solve that problem faster and beat the others and get more get more Bitcoin by solving the problem? Well, that's what happened. And when you knew it, you've net, basic circuits, which are application-specific integrated circuits that are being created for the only purpose is to solve that Bitcoin graphic problem on the chain. And they're not using computers under their desks anymore. They're actually using data center size implementations of these computers to do it. And they're global. This isn't something that's being handled. It's self-organizing. And in fact, a lot of the computing power, I mentioned China earlier, a lot of the mining power is actually based in China now, which creates an interesting dynamic because there is a vulnerability to Bitcoin, and it's called the 51% problem. Theoretically control 51% of all miners out there. You fool the network in believing that the most recent block that was on the chain is the real one because 51% of the miners agree that that's the case. The majority wins that cryptographic problem was solved accurately. And so there's always been this concern out there that if one nation or even the non-state actor will create harness enough compute power that it could cause a problem with the Bitcoin network, it could cause manipulation. It's theoretical. And the reason why it's theoretical is if you started mucking with the Bitcoin, you can maybe do it once, but as soon as you started mucking with the Bitcoin currency and stability, or it was determined that there were faulty transactions and that one actor did have most of the mining power, it would cause the value of the currency to crash. And the value of the currency crashed, it would actually destroy all the incentives that we talked about a moment ago for the miners to get together and actually do this effort. So it's a theoretical challenge. or a theoretical vulnerability, and the miners play into that vulnerability very heavily. But currently, we haven't seen an instance of this happening. And is more and more nodes come on the network, globally distributed, is more and more currency. We can see this in the price. More and more people are buying the currency. More nodes, then the chance of this happening continue to fall linearly. Sir, Grace, did that answer sort of your mining question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
You're welcome. When you create a currency that now is worth $10 billion, well, and you're using an open source technology called blockchain to do it, a ton of copycats want to jump in and make this happen. Our own kind of currency. So Bitcoin is the most is like 99% of the market. But there are another, I'm going to say 700 currencies out there. None of these have anywhere near the value that nowhere near. I think there's only 8 of them might have any value over $10 million US. The 8 of these 700. So, but this is open source. There's people out there that have time or that are interested or want to create coins around their specific interests. And many of them have tweaked the underlying blockchain technology, so it's based on what they're interested in. And a lot of these are quite plainly just nefarious, either people screwing around or just nefarious actors that are messing around too. I mean, if you look at some of these pictures, if you see it on the screen, there's no shortage of marijuana leaves and Guy Fawkes masks and just all sorts of interesting characters that have out and created these coins. So more isn't necessarily better, but what it does show from a technology perspective is that there is some real intent here to create lasting, scalable technology to test, right? I mean, these people have taken time, energy, and their own personal money to modify, to play with, to exploit, to really work with this open source technology. And whatever their goals are, from an academic or an intellectual perspective, it's only shown the strength of the underlying blockchain technology, and it plays into the knowledge that we gain from this is sort of like an experiment of how this technology can be applied to other use cases. So, you guys are familiar with Moore's hammer, which is that idea that if I mean, in this picture brings it straight, right? If I have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if I've got this blockchain technology, and I know that it works for currency, well, what do with this, right? Like, I think I can do everything with this if I'm looking at it from my perspective, and I'm anyone in the world. And that's where the original race was around blockchain. Okay, it uses a currency. It's a distributed ledger. Well, now we're going to put absolutely everything on the blockchain. We're going to put cars on the blockchain. We're going to put, I jokingly say, we're going to put ice cream on the blockchain. Anytime I want to keep a record of anything, let's put it on a blockchain. Blockchain had become, and in some sectors it still is, just sort of the go-to answer of what you do. And that's not necessarily the case. You have to be thoughtful about what we use blockchains for. Isn't just this wonderful peanut butter that can be spread over everything. It really is it's a time consuming. It has downsides if not implemented properly. It has a ton of opportunity. Don't get me wrong, but we really need to think about use cases, and that's what we're going to talk about for the next little bit, the second half of what could we do with this and why are we going to do it. But there's just a couple other ideas that I make sure that everyone's familiar with before we talk about the use cases, because it will make use cases go easier. Blockchains are created equal. So we're going to now move to talking about blockchains with a lowercase b. So a lowercase b blockchain are blockchains that are used for all sorts of other things, but they're necessarily the public blockchain, the most well-known, the blockchain with a capital B that's associated with Bitcoin. and there's a lot of reasons for that. The Bitcoin blockchain is a public blockchain. Anyone out there can read it. Anyone can send transactions to it. Anyone can put their node on the network, fire up computers, and mine on it, which is the consensus process. Anyone can be involved in that blockchain should they wish. And in the currency world, or in some use cases, that makes a lot of sense, right? Let's have it open. Let's have it public. Let's have it. Anyone can see every transaction, no matter who it's from or where it's to or for the amount or whatever's being stored out there. There's a lot of power in that argument because it's a network effect. Therefore, you have more miners. Therefore, you have more distributed miners. So therefore, you've got more processing power. So you've got more security. In fact, the immutability and the ease in which that very public blockchain can be mucked with goes down. But in the world, you don't always want everybody to see every single transaction on there. You don't want everyone to be able to see everything that's happening in public view. So a lot of times now, especially the areas that I work in and my team works in, it's how do we leverage blockchain technology for very specific commercial or governmental reasons, but we don't want everyone to see everything going on. And there's two different kinds of blockchains that are generally created, and that's called consortiums, where groups of people come together to act, consortium blockchains, where groups of people that have a common interest come together to create a blockchain, but they let the public maybe see what's going on in that blockchain, but only members of the consortium are allowed to transact on it. The financial world is a great example of banks that are coming together on creating these consortium blockchains where you could have existing financial transactions or recording stock or moving financial instruments from one institution to another, but anyone can transact on it. Only members of that consortium are allowed to transact. And then, which is much more constrictive, is called private blockchain. So the owner owns everything about that blockchain. They own who can see it, who can transact on it, who can be a miner on it. They lock down everything. And now, out in the world of pure Bitcoin blockchain sort of analysis, that begins to become contrary to the notion of the useful purpose of a blockchain, right? So the whole idea here was for us to move an asset around from individual to individual or from entity to entity without one person being in control of every aspect of it. So that's really what a private blockchain is. A private blockchain there's one entity that controls whatever's on within that blockchain. So you lose a lot of the benefits that we talked about, the immutability of it. You lose the consensus capabilities. But what you gain is maybe you get a distributed ledger. Maybe you're not so concerned about other parties interacting with that blockchain. You're most interested that you have a free ledger that can be distributed to multiple locations, and you automatically get redundancy in it. It's the most efficient use of a blockchain, but it's one that's becoming very common. The other piece of knowledge that I want to talk about before we get into use cases is this notion of smart contracts. So not enough to go out and create a wonderful science-based ledger called blockchain and record assets on it. What would happen if we went to the next level, which if we were to create a programming language that sat on top of a blockchain that was so cryptographically secure, that do certain activities, that could do things depending on what's going on, right, out in the world. And so that's what smart contracts are called. They're code, they're programs that are written, that are cryptographically signed, that are based on the blockchain, any blockchain, whether it be public, private, consortium, or the Bitcoin blockchain, that do certain activities. And this one example got on the screen here is a sales contract. So say that a sale happened, and this is all pseudocode, and you guys can read it. The sale happened. What we need to do is we need to figure out how to distribute the commission revenue share from the sale. And this contract actually just goes through that in a programmatic way. And you've got the smart contract also tied to the currency, the example Bitcoin, but you could also do it with another currency if you wanted to create it that way. You immediately move the money from one person to another, and a computer program handle it all from beginning to end. Now, we're still in the very early days of smart contracts. One is that, well, cases, what it sits for, and that's still being explored. The programming language that allow you to codify this stuff. This is a very simple program, and the real world is not so simple. But there are some contracts that this might make sense for. Very simple financial instruments. A fact, if something happened in the world, say that the temperature met a threshold, it was 80 degrees Fahrenheit today in a certain place, you could have a contract that executed based on that, the fact that the weather was the weather today. We can argue about what that use case would be for, but get my point, right? You have an event that happens external, and then you have code that executes on the blockchain because that event happened. So I'll here one more second. We can go around the room, and then I'm going to hop into use cases here for the last 10 or so minutes. Okay. Some use cases. So one bread and butter and first use cases that was really leveraged is putting assets on it, right? Bitcoin is a great example of using a currency, money on a blockchain. Other things of value you can put on blockchains too. Essentially register them. It's immutable. We can change it after we've registered it. It's there, so it's public. All benefits is distributed. Well, one asset that has a lot of value is diamonds. A company called Ledger that's gone out doing just that. It's gone out 10 diamonds, including GIA numbers, which is the industry way in which each diamond is marked, as well as their measurements. Every diamond is unique, and actually placing that information on a blockchain. And the original reason for this wasn't because it would be fun to do, but it's actually insurance industry. There's billions of dollars of lost precious metals as well as diamonds every year that there's insurance claims against. Well, if we have a record that's global, that's distributed, that can't be messed with, of where every diamond is and when it's sold and when it's bought, and not necessarily knowing the who's or the what's, but that it exists out there, you can then begin to track diamonds, right? You can track diamonds from their source all the way through their purchase and life that occurs after that. And assets are just a great use case of putting things that are of value. Diamonds are the first example that Ledger went down. Jewelry, electronics, any asset with a serial number or something that you can describe with in code is an asset you could put on a blockchain. Another example, which is a little bit different, is land. Land has coordinates. It's the master that knows what a property is, and it has various descriptors, mathematical descriptors around the plot of land. What if we were to start putting land and land ownership on a blockchain? And first examples of this was Factum is a nonprofit entity, as well as a for-profit consulting firm. But this nonprofit entity worked with the Honduras government to do that. Honduras had a not completely unique problem, but one that's not often found in the developed world, that government officials would come in and literally just steal land from people, because there was a database, a central database that the government controlled, where all the land registry was stored, and government officials were simply going in and just changing title and changing the ownership of land within that computer system. And then there was also this issue of almost over half the land in Honduras was undocumented. The ownership, it's owned. The people know they own it. They believe they own it, or a family. It's been handed down by generations, but it's not documented. So the blockchain was a perfect place to store this stuff. You use geographic coordinates to mark the land. You could then, in the ownership of the land, and all on a blockchain where it's immutable, where it's distributed, everyone can see it. All the transactions are public. That's going on, including Thomson Reuters. We've done some work around our own land management software that could potentially leverage blockchain, and there's a whole host of benefits with this particular use case. I did a great one too because it needs to be stored somewhere, especially if we're starting to talk about global identity and identity of individuals as they move across borders. 2016, and when I travel, and I travel a lot, I carry around, like all of us do, a little book where we get stamped when we move from country to country. And then there's all this whole other world that doesn't even use passports, right? That are moving in more nefarious ways across borders. And it's not out in the open, and they don't have stamps in the passport. But it's in 2016, sort of this paper thing that I carry around that's easily forgeable, that can get lost, that is just has a lot of negatives to it. There's ways and there's opportunities to essentially store the asset being my identity on a blockchain as well. And this slide isn't meant to be an eye chart. There's a lot of text on here, but it'll highlight the why identity is and what digital identity is. Identity being the notion that we have. There's three things about us that make us up. One is my inherited identity, my DNA. That's the history that makes me as a human being. I also have accumulated identities, which are identities about my behaviors and how I act, characteristics about my behaviors and how I act and where I go and what I do. And I've written records and when I had my last immunizations and sort of where I went to college and where I work, all this sort of stuff. Even as far in 2016 as my Twitter account and my Instagram account and my email address. All of these things are sort of this accumulated identity around what I do. And then assigned identities. Assigned identities are generally assigned by government entities or some sort of authority that decides that I am Scott Manuel and that I have the right to take that passport and move it from country to country. And so two of these three are pretty easily accounted in computers already, right? Accumulated and assigned. There's databases that already exist out there about my email address and my passport number and where I am. But when you start to move into biometrics and biometric keys, I mentioned earlier in the whole conversation about how everything about the blockchain is based on public and private key cryptography. And I have a private key, and that allows me to, in the Bitcoin world to control my money. Well, I also have a private key in biometric capabilities. My iris is my iris, and my fingerprint is my fingerprint. My echocardiogram signature is mine. Now, we can all talk about the threat matrix around how each of those could be manipulated or fooled or mucked with, but at the end of the day, that is my private key. And to add up those private keys plus all of the other accumulated identity and characteristics that I have, using this path of potentially there's a use for blockchains with identity, and it's a conversation for another day. And a fascinating one. But a lot of governments are looking at this and how do we leverage blockchain? How do we leverage biometrics to handle identification? And at the end of here, I'll talk about what we're doing, a small bit that we're doing in that space, and how it could play in a lot to our hackathon coming up. And here it is. We Thomson Reuters have built we're working on building to allow block software, a platform, to be easily used in the enterprise. There's a lot of software back here in what I've described previously, and our current inclination in trying to make blockchain technology easy to work with is around identification. It's not around all of the identification that I pointed out here, right? It's not entities, government level entities yet. Right now we're using OAuth 2.0, which is basic and public identities, which is our Twitter, our Facebook, our Gmail, to test out this idea around how could you begin to leverage the blockchain for identity. And if you're going to use it in simple identity not to get you on an airplane or not to get your financial account, but identities that can be leveraged for sort of low risk items. And so how do we do that? Well, we've actually created a hosted wallet where you can use your identity to unlock assets or access on these various blockchains. It's very experimental, but it is one of the areas where we're spending a good portion of our time sort of investigating, and that we move through this process and this education that we're going to try to do prior to our hackathon. BlockD and some of the other pieces of software that we've created will potentially be tools for everyone to sort of play with during this hackathon. I'm going to pause. I'm going to open it up for more questions. You guys are heroes and you've listened to me for 45 minutes. But let me see if there's any other questions that we want to answer here before I turn it back over to Pia.
All right, I've got a couple of things to ask, but I'll go after everybody else. Here in Canberra, do you have any? So Canberra, Sydney?
Joined I was on the phone and I've joined the Sydney group in the office now. It's Grace.
Hey, Grace.
I've just got a question around the blockchain with a capital and the overview you gave in relation to being this limit on the value of how much Bitcoin will ever be created on the blockchain. And I was wondering, in relation to blockchain and Bitcoin value, doesn't that limit the sort of the usability of the product, that at some point these miners are going to there's not going to be sufficient money to feed in their prize or whatever sort of wording terminology you were using?
That's a great question, and one I love because it really plays into the incentives part of it. So you're right. I said that there were going to be 21 million Bitcoins mined. These 21 million Bitcoins will be mined from now until 2140. But if we already have 75% of Bitcoins have already been mined and are out there, what does that mean? That clearly means that we're mining fewer and fewer Bitcoins over time. And the blockchain software, the capital B blockchain type software, has actual times. It's called halving, believe it or not. It's when the prize that those miners gets cut in half. And we just went through one of those in July. In July, or previous to July, every one of these puzzles you solved, you got 25 Bitcoins. So it halved. So now it's 12 and a half. So 20, it halves again to 12 and a half, divided by 2. So six and a quarter. And it keeps having at a predetermined schedule. I obviously don't have that predetermined schedule off the top of my head, but to all the way out to 2140 when the last Bitcoin will be mined. So what happens then, right? So the belief is, and somebody will call me and let me know when we get to 2140 what happened. But the belief is that you will then see the transfer of, you won't necessarily get a price for solving the crypto problem. Everybody who owns Bitcoin and transacts with it will have to pay a very small fee, a very small transaction fee. And it's analogous to the transaction fees we pay now with every time we want to use our currency out of our pockets. But that is where, at least in theory, this whole thing is headed. That as the price for mining gets lower, the transaction fee will go up. And it won't be until it won't be something that happens in 2140. Obviously, the fees will need to begin sooner than that because the price will continue to go down. What's so interesting, my last comment on this, is that this is inflationary by nature. So therefore, if I own a Bitcoin today, right, and it's $760 US dollars, or $750 US dollars today, and all the way out to that point in 2140 when no more are being created, Bitcoin should be worth an inordinate amount of money as long as this currency is around. And you don't transact on Bitcoin. You can divide it all the way out to the 8th decimal point and all the Satoshi. I mean, there's just so much fun stuff in here because the Satoshi is obviously named after the guy named Satoshi Nakamoto. And Satoshi is the lowest, the smallest of value of Bitcoin that you can transact. And it's clearly worth fractions of a fraction of a penny right now. But because there's only going to be 21 million mined, you could see how a Satoshi could become a lot more valuable over time. And that also talks about that deflationary aspect of it. In theory, the coin will be worth a lot more. Grace has probably a lot more than you wanted to know, but I hope that helped with you a little bit with your question.
Thanks very much.
Do you have any questions from Wollongong?
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, can I?
Okay.
Vicky, I apologise, Scott. I don't have an IT background, so I apologise if my questions sound uninformed. But I have an enforcement background. I'm just wondering, your idea, your product that you're working on to sort of create a blockchain of identity, how are you guys thinking ways to get around what you described as the 51% problem?
Right.
Considering sort of the sensitivity of that, or is there ways of getting around that, or is that just an inherent issue in blockchain?
So that's a great question, and it's not a silly question because there's a lot of nuance here. So what we're doing is obviously creating tools that could potentially allow someone to manage identity on a blockchain, but doing it for permanent blockchains or consortium blockchains. We necessarily envision this being something that would be leveraged on a public blockchain where you did have a 51% problem. We would potentially expect this to be leveraged by consortiums or organizations where there was more control or access around the entities that were using it. Now, it's not to be said that it couldn't be used, but on the public blockchain, and it could be used for a whole host of use cases that aren't as sensitive as government ID, right, or access to my financial information. They could be used for anything, access to my music catalog or just things that just don't matter, right? The access to won't really matter that much, access to a news group or something. So there are really lower level use cases that this will be very easily for, and the 51% problem just isn't that big of a deal. When you start talking about leveraging tools like this for government-based identity, there's a whole different level of obviously security that you need to think about, as well as how do you create those blockchains. And that's where you want to create blockchains that aren't susceptible to the 51% problem. And blockchains, just like everything else, are changing too. Bitcoin blockchain is software, so it's being updated and it's being modified. All of these private blockchains or consortium blockchains that are being created, we call them fabrics. They're being created for specific problems, like the financial industry is working on one. R3 is the name of that company or that consortium, and it's called Corda. And they're trying to do just that, Vicky, take the risk out of how a blockchain could be hacked, or solving for that 51% problem. Or in the case of the financial services, how do we make, I talked about in Bitcoin, it's all the transactions that happen every 10 minutes that put it on a blockchain. Obviously, that's not going to work in a financial services world. You need transactions per second. So they're working on modifying fabrics to support that problem. So all of this is a work in progress. And before we would ever put identity, like government identity, on a blockchain, the issues would be sorted out. And we're, as well as governments, are trying to do that.
I'm going to just throw in a couple last comments just to wrap this back into and then we're going to close the recording. And if there's any further questions, I might get people to follow up with Scott directly or indeed with me if that's useful. So just a couple of closing comments, and this is again directed back to the ICE forum. First of all, the purpose of our international hackathon is to put this into practice. Obviously, there will be additional training sessions in the lead up to get everyone a bit more familiar with the concept. But the idea is to get our hands dirty, to actually play with this stuff, see what it means in practice, and identify what it means for us in the financial sector and in the business of financial sector regulation and intelligence. But the goal isn't just to look for the benefits and the ways that blockchain can be used to positively disrupt the sector. It's also to explore some of the risks. So, I mean, if we had identity as a good example, there are countries that have no systems of identity that are, that could be translated into anything of any integrity on a blockchain or otherwise. It's not a panacea, as Scott's put out. It is something for us to explore. Scott spoke before about the microcurrencies after the Where's Wally creator, and we've heard reports of people doing microcurrency transactions to the opportunity to write inappropriate stuff or illegal stuff to the ledger. So there are some very interesting ways that this stuff is being used to both disrupt in a positive way and disrupt in a negative way the finance sector and beyond, and other sectors. The point of the hackathon is to give us a chance to get our hands dirty, to explore the opportunities and risks and the different ways to wargame this technology a little bit. And it's also worth pointing out the smart contract aspect that Scott spoke about. If we were to try and build all of our collective rules into smart contracts and hard code them into technologies, obviously that would create a lack of agility in how those rules might adapt over time. So some of them in Australia to try to codify our rules and make it available programmatically can actually dramatically be then picked up by this kind of technology where we can build the rules of engagement, financial engagement, into transactions that are being done through things like blockchain and through smart contracts. So there's a lot of good opportunities to pull new together. Just want to say a huge thank you to Scott for your time in talking us through Blockchain 101. Hopefully Hackathon 101 briefly presented the beginning was helpful one, and we'll follow this up with a few extra more in-depth sessions for people to start getting their hands dirty. So thank you very much. And if we stop the recording now.
Yeah, nice.
Thank you. And the recording's finished, so we've got a resource to set out. Does anyone have any other follow-ups for Scott for now?
Pia could talk to Scott all day as far as I'm concerned. I think he
and I could talk to you guys all day. It's a great topic, and I think we have a cool journey. These next few months as we work on this, leading up to this hackathon. I mean, this is a fascinating area of computer science, and it just keeps changing. And the business opportunities and the government opportunities are huge. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. And if you guys have more questions, I'm more than happy to talk. You've got my email address. And I've got a team too. It's not just me, right? I got people. So I will get stumped at some point. So let's just have an active conversation.
All right. What I might do then, given that we only had another 10 minutes of your time scheduled originally, and given that it's late at night there, and we really appreciate you coming and talking to us at nighttime, your time, what I might do is ask if anyone has any further questions. Scott's email is just there, or you've got it, I think, on the calendar invite. So please send emails directly to Scott, and in the loop if you want to. It's up to you, but the more knowledge that we can transfer into Austrac, the better. Scott, I do need to spend just 5 minutes with you talking about hackathon logistics, if that's all right.
No worries.
For that, and if everyone else wants to hang out or head back to work, then I'll leave that to you guys. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. Cool.
Your attention, folks.